Braun gives himself a B+. Former Indy mayor jumps into Secretary of State race, and AES sales strikes a nerve. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending March 6, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.
Indiana Governor Mike Braun gives himself a B+ for this year's legislative session, saying that his administration successfully tackled issues of affordability and government efficiency. Caroline Beck reports he says out of 58 bills that were a priority for his office, 51 were passed.
Despite an early, rocky start to this year's legislative session with a failed redistricting vote, Braun presented a picture of success marked by a good working relationship with state lawmakers.
Very much open conversation, transparent. We want to work together. And if you look at these results, that's pretty impressive.
Braun also took time to support President Donald Trump's recent attacks against Iran.
I think so far so good. We'll see what happens, but I think it was long overdue, making a strong statement for the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism.
While Braun heralded the session's work around affordability issues, Democrats say this year's bills still don't address Hoosiers' everyday concerns.
Did the governor have a solid second session? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat, Laura Beck. Republican, Whitley Yates. Caroline Beck, government reporter at WFYI. And Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief at Mirror Indy. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. So, Whitley, is this an accurate grade that the governor has given himself for this legislative session?
Well, you know, my nickname is Win, so I do think he has had successful wins in this very short session. To have an agenda with 58 items on it is a lot, if we're going to be honest, and achieving 51 out of the 58 is about an 88%. So him giving himself a B+ is not necessarily generous. I think it is accurate. And I looked at the types of bills that were produced, and you have bills that cover a wide range of Hoosiers. So whether it's kids bringing cell phones into schools or utility affordability that's going to really help our senior citizens that are on a fixed income. I think that the bills really span all Hoosiers and going to impact all of them.
I mean, Laura, when we do see the list that she mentioned, you know, a lot of these are administrative bills, a lot of regulations bills, a lot of pretty broad bills that did have support amongst lawmakers, the Republican lawmakers. Do you think that he had a successful session with what his priorities were?
Well, I think actually, if you look at his number one priority going into that session was passing redistricting, and that was a failure. That did not work, and he made it a key centerpiece of this is what I want done, this is what we're going to do, and members of his own party bucked him and pretty much told the president we are not going to rig elections going forward. The other part about that is politically you're seeing now some of the folks who were promising retribution for the failure of redistricting. Some of that appears to be petering out as well. So I think, you know, you can give yourself a B+ on administrative actions, but really the lead story is you lost your signature piece of legislation, and that was redistricting.
I mean, Oseye, we did see, you know, that all play out in December, very high profile. And then we had to deal with that throughout the rest of the regular session with redistricting having failed. Do you think that soured things a bit for the governor?
I was surprised that it did not sour them more. I thought there would be more of a fallout and more discord between his party in the State House and himself, and I didn't see that. So to Whitley's point, I think he did get 51 things of 58 things he wanted done. So we still, if there is more fallout from redistricting, we shall see. I thought, like I said, it would be more. So I was a little, I wanted to say disappointed, but just kind of surprised that there wasn't more tension after that, because it did seem like it was going to be a moment where we would see a lot of discord between the two groups.
Yeah, they seem to downplay it quite a bit as we got into, the meat of the legislative session. Caroline, what were some of the pieces of legislation that the governor thought were a win that you really felt that he had prioritized?
Yeah, he definitely pointed towards the affordability issue bills, like the housing matters and the utility cost bills. He considered those to be a good win for everyday Hoosiers. Democrats obviously are pushing back and saying, especially when it comes to the utilities bill, that it's really not going to do a lot for the everyday Hoosier. There are also concerns around the housing bill, that there's, too many opt-out things in there now. So is it really going to produce more housing? It's kind of hard to say at this point. But I know he was also really, Governor Braun was also proud of the matters around social media restrictions and making sure that bill got passed, and the things around cell phones in schools also being tighter restrictions now. So those kind of safeguard measures for children, I think he was really proud to see get across the line. Again, it's a little uncertain if they're going to pass, judicial review and see challenges in the courts going forward. But for now, he's calling it a win, so he's happy.
Well, we did see a lot of the legislation that passed aligning with federal moves and sort of doing that procedurally. Do you think that the governor, wanted to prioritize those types of legislation?
Absolutely. And honestly, if we're looking at how redistricting impacted, being in line with the federal government and with the Trump administration is pivotal for the state of Indiana when it comes to the way in which we engage and the way in which we honestly receive funds. And I think that after the redistricting fallout, which I wouldn't necessarily say was at the top of his agenda, but it was something that was imparted on him by the Trump administration, and he did carry it out, which I would hope most governors would do. It is important to note that it did not sully the progress of this administration and what he was going to do for Hoosiers here.
Thinking back to his State of the State, he mentioned the Chicago Bears like 3 times. That bill, of course, we know did pass the stadium bill. That seemed like it was a priority from the start, and now a win.
I think that's a good point. I think what's interesting about that, though, is that was a nice pivot for them away from redistricting, and it was also a way to, redistricting was the goal, right? And so when you take it on the chin with redistricting by your own party, and then you can all come back together to try and bring the Bears to Northwest Indiana. It also was an opportunity, too, for some bipartisanship as well. You've got Mayor McDermott up there, and Hammond, who's just a visionary and who's really got some creative ideas about it. So it was an opportunity to dunk on Illinois a little bit, an opportunity to try and turn the page from redistricting and then try and have some semblance of a bipartisan win.
Well, that was the big bipartisan win. Now, former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard is joining the increasingly crowded race for Indiana's Secretary of State. As Ben Thorpe reports, the former Republican says he will run as an independent.
Ballard served as the Republican mayor of Indianapolis for 2 terms from 2008 to 2015. But in his announcement video, Ballard says he will run as an independent, saying both parties are broken. Ballard says he's especially concerned with the politics of the current Secretary of State, Republican Diego Morales.
The current leadership in that office has shown an eagerness to engage in partisan politics. I thought my career in public service had ended, but when you see something this broken and know you can fix it, you step forward.
Ballard says he's running primarily to protect the integrity of elections. Beau has announced his candidacy for Secretary of State as well, filing as a Democrat.
So, Laura, is this going to shake up the race for Secretary of State in Indiana?
I think it already is. I think it was really one of the dominating headlines of this last week. And I try to stay off social media as much as possible, but based on what I could see, there was a sort of internal war breaking out among Republicans. Yeah, I definitely do. And looking at somebody like Greg Ballard, who I'm actually really fond of, I think he's a really great guy, and I've always really enjoyed his company. He has a sniffer for the political zeitgeist that few have. And when you look back to 2007, and he came out of nowhere, not well funded, but he tapped into a voter energy and a voter anger. You now look at where we are today. People are tired of politics as usual, and I think their response to this is just politics as usual. People are tired of it. You also have a hunger for independent third-party candidates. And people want someone who is authentic. And Greg Ballard is a pretty authentic person. The challenge becomes for him and for his campaign, money. That's going to be well-funded campaigns he's going to be running against. And it's also, where do you take votes away from? Do you take votes away from Republicans? Do you take votes away from Democrats? I personally think he'll play really well in outside of the Indianapolis media market. But ultimately, he will be running against, I'm assuming he's going to be running against Bayh, who is a really good candidate.
Well funded as well.
Yes, exactly. And Diego Morales.
So, Whitley, we did see a little bit of backlash on the social media and some Republicans, coming for Ballard and saying, that he doesn't live here and asking about residency questions. Do you feel that divide in the party?
Well, as his message said, is he a part of the party? He's independent of the party. So
this is true.
Anytime you set yourself apart, I think that once you've been a part of a party and you've been an elected official in the party and then you decide to break away, there is going to be that level of tension. I also think that we have to look at this circumspectly. He was the mayor of Indianapolis, one of the most liberal places in the state of Indiana, and he has resonance here in Indianapolis. As someone who's traveled 92 counties and understand the pulse and the beat in different areas, I'm not quite sure if he has those relationships established and if they would like to align with that level of leadership. That's neither here nor there. What I will say is anytime you see someone who decides to break away from a party to be independent, it is definitely a pause for cause, and people will pay a lot of attention to it.
What do you think it says, Caroline, as he jumps into this race, with issues of election security and with issues of, our elections being top of mind, that he really wants to weigh in?
Yeah. I think it really shows that, this question around election security really hasn't gone away since, we really first heard it from President Trump when he challenged the 2020 election. And so, I think, we saw it even this year in the legislative session. We saw an effort to try to reduce the number of early voting days in Indiana that ultimately didn't get all the way through. But the conversation's still there, and the Republican caucus still sees this as a priority issue of wanting to secure Indiana's elections. It is interesting, though, too, because we heard from, Speaker Todd Houston when President Trump, said publicly that he thinks the federal government should be taking over elections. But Houston was like, we like how we run our elections here. And so there is a little bit of push and pull with, how the National Republican Caucus is feeling and then how Indiana's caucus is feeling. So it is interesting to see that this is, becoming a biggest race issue right now. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how far the Republican caucus wants to actually push the topic of election security.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Shia, what do you think as far as, more independents, or more people announcing that they will be with an independent party and moving away from the establishment here in the state?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially when I saw the news, I had to pause myself. And first of all, I was like, oh, Greg Ballard, where have you been? Back into politics. You're throwing your hat back in the ring here for the Secretary of State, no less. So that just makes me think, too, people are really unhappy with Diego Morales. And also, as we're growing, we see what Independent Indiana said there's 41% of Hoosiers identify as independent. And to your point about Ballard recognizing the zeitgeist that we're in. So that seems to be a growing contingent of people deciding we're not with either party because they're not doing what we want. We're not pleased with either one. So we are now moving to an independent route. And I think that is something that we've tried for a very long time to have a third party independent, and it's not really gone anywhere. But we could see some actual change, some actual movement now with someone like Ballard, who does surprise people. He became the mayor of Indianapolis, which, to your point, liberal of Indiana, yes, but still, he was Republican, and we've not had one since.
Yeah, I was there that night.
And he beat Peterson. He beat Bart Peterson.
Well, but
he raised taxes.
You have to also remember. Well, no, he was. Well, I'm going to relitigate it, but I worked for Mayor Peterson this first term. So, but what I was going to say is, what we also say is, Whitley, back to your point of Indianapolis being really liberal. Back in 2007, when he won, Peterson had been the first Democratic mayor in like 20-some, 30 years, coming in 1999. So, it was, he was a very popular mayor at the time, but Mayor Ballard was able to really capitalize on that anger and really galvanize people around it. And it will be very interested to see if he can recreate that magic here. But he has really good, strong people behind him. I also think it says something about the modern Republican Party in Indiana that the former mayor of Indianapolis, who was a pretty well-liked figure, has to run as an independent because everyone has lined up against, lined up with Diego Morales.
Well, it also goes back to movements, times, because when he won, it was Tea Party time, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
The start of the Tea Party.
It was Tea Party time. So it also just kind of goes back to where things ebb and flow and how people are feeling about the economy, about property taxes, about what's going on.
Right. I also have to ask, is it a grift as well, right? Do you run as a Republican that's non-traditional because this is what you need to do to separate yourself from Bart Peterson? And now do you run as an independent because now you don't want any of the repercussions of whatever you think the Republican Party is doing? Is it a grift or is it genuine? We have yet to see.
I don't think calling. I wouldn't say
or just being
he's
smart.
A grift. I wouldn't say it's a grift. I would
politically
got a lot of signatures. He's
it's politically advantageous
on the November ballot. Now it's time for our viewer feedback. Every week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: will Greg Ballard's entry into the Secretary of State race have a big impact in November? Vote yes or no. The last question posed to viewers: will moves to tighten welfare eligibility help save Indiana money? 22% saying yes, and 78% answering no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. The Indiana Treasurer of State is raising concerns over the utility company AES Indiana will be purchased by an investment group. Zach Castle reports.
The group of domestic and international investors includes BlackRock and the Qatar Investment Authority. State Treasurer Daniel Elliott says he's gathering information about the proposed deal. He worries the sale will hurt central Indiana residents who pay AES for electricity.
The reason they're coming here is because Indiana is a digital crossroads, and they want to be able to take on the AI race and use this to fund the AI race.
Elliott has previously criticized BlackRock for investing decisions and says other groups have a history of financial mismanagement. He wants a full, transparent review by federal regulators before he would support a deal.
So, Caroline, now we're hearing a little bit more from the state treasurer about this group. What have you read?
Yeah, so Daniel Elliott, he just published an op-ed yesterday in the Indy Star talking about, his biggest, I'd say, reason or what he's saying is that, there's just a lot of unknowns around this deal. And BlackRock is a group that he's pointed to before of having concerns. In 2024, he put them on a watch list saying they should not be involved in Indiana's pension system. And I think he is mostly just worried that this is going to result in higher utility rates for customers, and it's going to ultimately affect Hoosiers, bills. And so there's just too much unknown right now for him, I think, to feel comfortable in this deal. And it's interesting, too, because he, as a Republican, is also sharing a lot of same concerns we're hearing from Democrats, too, who are saying, yeah, this seems like a unsure situation right now, and we want to know how this is ultimately going to impact ratepayers. So, yeah, there's just too many unknowns, and people are concerned. Yeah.
Well, Oseye, we did hear, from Democrats, and we have heard, all session long as well about the affordability issue of utilities, and people are upset.
People are upset with AES right now.
They're paying a lot.
They're on the hot seat, and they've been on the hot seat for a while. And I really appreciate our state treasurer coming out as an elected official and or appointed. Is he appointed or elected? I can't remember.
He appointed.
But anyway, it doesn't matter. Really having the backs of Hoosiers. I really appreciate him having concerns because I think most people have these same concerns. One of the things I wondered about is if you become a private company, utility company, what happens to Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission? What kind of oversight will they now have over this. And I know that our governor said that he was really worried about bringing rates down. But is that a short-term thing? What happens in the long term? What happens when people out of the country who don't live in Indiana run our power grid? Like, what kind of concerns should we have? So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of unanswered things, and I do think we have the right to ask these questions and know what's going on. What could the future hold for us?
Is this going to be a risk for the state? You know, one of the 5 largest utility groups in the state having this type of acquisition?
Oh, I think absolutely, and I think it's very smart politically for the state treasurer to do this. It's also good policy. I don't know exactly what, as treasurer, he can do. My understanding, and I would need to check this, but I think some of the reasons why he targeted BlackRock before was because of some of the ESG related, not their business practices. It was more along that, but. I think it's interesting to see in this moment of populism and the concern about affordability. To me, it's a real sign that people are seeing it on the ground, and the Republicans, and they're not running away from it. You know, Congressman Carson was one of the first to immediately come out and question this transaction and call it into question. But policy-wise, I'd be very interested to find out what he could do, and I would really encourage him, if he's going to continue it, to make it more of a broader bipartisan effort, because I think, again, this is something that people can really get behind because of all of the issues with AES and, frankly, having private equity responsible for when we have a power outage. And
he is a Republican. Do you think we'll hear more from the party about this deal, or is this going to be done? Lawmakers as well could have considered this during the session and did not.
I think that utility costs are a major topic in the state of Indiana. Governor Braun has been talking about it and made steps and produced bills on it. They've revamped, is what I like to call the IURC. We've got new, fresh energy with former State Senator Zay running it now. And so you've seen this push. But I do want to state that what we're seeing in Indiana when it comes to utility is what everyone is seeing around the nation. So there is a problem, and I'm not saying that we don't have a problem here. I'm just saying other states are also feeling this issue. And what I wonder, I did write about this in October about this BlackRock and them purchasing it, because in all honesty, you want to keep the lights on and the bill low. And how we're going to be able to do that is important. But I do believe the IURC will have domain over their rates and then being able to raise the rates. Stopping the acquisition, I don't know if that's in the best interest of free market capitalism. But what I will say is seeing how it impacts Hoosiers is important, and making sure that the utility costs don't go high and people are not left in the dark is important.
Well, U.S. and Israeli militaries are pledging to continue strikes on Iran. Aubrey Wright has more on how the war could affect Hoosiers and their wallets.
Hoosiers should expect gas prices to go up as fighting in the Persian Gulf continues. Hussein Benai is an associate professor of international studies at Indiana University. Benai says the fallout in Indiana will be economic.
Obviously, the price of oil is going to shoot up, and that means the rising prices across the board because transportation costs will go up. So people are going to feel the price hike not only at the pump, but also in supermarkets.
NPR reports stock markets are down, and any price hikes will increase inflation.
So, Oshia, do we expect that there will be other impacts felt?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We've already seen gas go up. Already, $3.49? I think I got saved 10 cents the other day, so $3.39. But I was reading the shipping. We already have tariffs in place. Groceries we know are going to be impacted. Cereal, boxes of cereal can be impacted. Diesel, truck drivers who rely on diesel and of course, though that's how we get our goods through shipping. So we will definitely, and as long as the longer it goes on, the more we will feel it. And we're already being squeezed in so many areas when it comes to affordability. So this is just one more area now that Hoosiers are going to be impacted and feel a pinch in their wallets.
Caroline, will we see more of this trickle-down effect? I know we are hearing of different markets.
Yes, yeah. Our Bloomington reporting partners just reported today that farmers are being concerned about fertilizing prices because of the shipping constraints around Iran right now. They're, cracking down on all sorts of things getting to them, including the fertilizer. So we could be seeing impacts coming to crops, in months' time, just as farmers are beginning to start planting things right now. So yeah, it could have like a long-lasting impact besides just the immediate right now. So.
And Whitley, really quickly, just as we enter into another conflict without a resolution from Congress, what should Hoosiers be thinking about?
We need to be thinking about putting America first, and what that means and how we do that should be indicative of our moves not only here but also abroad.
Well, that's Indiana Week in Review this week. Our panel has been Democrat Laura Beck, Republican Whitley Yates, Caroline Beck, government reporter at WFYI, and Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief at Mirror Indy. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.